I'm Michael Knowles, here to tell you that Rules for Retrogrades, the book and the show, are out now, and you absolutely need to check it out before the thought police confiscate all of it and lock you away.
Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. What's up out there, everybody? Not only are we here on Rules for Retrogrades, Dave and Tim, excited, pumped, and really long prepared for the battle that will follow upon in pursuance of the release of our book, which takes place next week. Man, but we are beset on all sides by coronavirus and the crazy stuff happening in the Vatican, the continued weird implementation of Carita Amazonia, and the onslaught of the globalists, socialists, and the Freemasons who are working against the church from inside and out. Today, I come to you all from my familiar locale with a solo vid. We were going to do a numbered episode today, but due to the exigencies of the weekend, coronavirus, a lot of people's works, including possibly mine, are being canceled, postponed, relocated. I just wanted to, I have a birthday coming up. I wanted to get a video going, and so I just thought I would do the next solo Tim video, and we'll push back the unnumbered Rules for Retrogrades with Dave and me until next week. Today I wanted to talk to you about a pamphlet, short book that I'll be either self-publishing or perhaps with Tan I'll release it. It's going to be a book simply titled something like, What Are They Doing? What are they doing? Or something like that. So don't I have to write it still, but I've been talking about it and making provision for it, because in the wake of the release of Carita Amazonia from February, second week of February of this year, about a month ago, almost to the date, the program of weaponized ambiguity being effectuated, run like one of the black ops from the Vatican, it's been happening since Vatican II, has become so crystal clear to me that I felt, this needs to be laid out in a handbook. What are they doing? How are they implementing what a lot of frustrated, good-hearted, beset-feeling traditionalists would call heterodoxy? Okay, it's not quite heterodoxy, what's happening. It is codified heteropraxy. And I'm going to explain that term, and it's no fun to say. It's a $10 word. Sounds like you're trying to be smart or impress your professor or something. It's not heterodoxy. This is carefully orchestrated not to equate to heterodoxy. Here's what I mean. As Cardinal Walter Casper told Raymond Arroyo in June of 2015, I've talked a lot about this. I talked about it with Steve Skojek of 1 Peter 5 and one of his writers, Julia Maloney of 1 Peter 5. He told Arroyo, in between the two synods of 2014 and 2015, Walter Cardinal Casper, what we did in the first synod, he meant the 2014 synod, which really got badly out of hand because they weren't codifying their heteropraxy nearly subtly enough. He claimed I was in favor and now I'm no longer in favor. Pope Francis no longer favors the proposals that I, Cardinal Casper, have been making for 30 years at that point, shot down by JP2, and now recharged by having this Pope that the St. Gallen Mafia is so excited about. what he also told, and he was lying, right? He ended up having his way. His proposal for getting the communion to the civilly divorced and remarried worked. It worked like a charm, and that is in the books since middle 2016 with the publication and then later interpretation of Amoris Laetitia. That's in the books. And so that was really interesting at the time, in between the two synods of 2014 and 2015. I didn't believe him then because I'm like the little boy who never lost his mistrust, as Marge Simpson calls her son Bart. I knew, no, Pope Francis loves him. I'm always skeptical in this era, in this pontificate, with this curia, with this cardinalate, with these guys. I don't buy it. And you guys know that. Same as I don't buy anything that was popularly claimed about Carita Amazonia. That was interesting then, still interesting now, but what's really key in this interview, and I spoke with Julia Maloney about this, and Steve Skojek, is the fact that Casper said, here's how synods work. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. The way that we did in 2014 get a lot of stuff passed by popular vote, and we're going to do it again in 2015, was the same thing we did in the council, Vatican II. And he's just repeating the famed words of Skilabix when he said, we wrote it vaguely, vague enough to be popular. I'm paraphrasing. And we knew what we were going to do with it later. And he said, same thing with the first 2014 Synod, same thing with the Second Vatican Council. We knew what we were going to do. This is not heterodoxy. So what I'm trying with actually all of my all the strength I can muster and all of the jurisprudential powers that I can muster is to get traditionalists and retrogrades within the church to think not post-textually, because that means you don't believe text matters, to think subtextually. Now, many traditionalists are already there, right? I mean, we never want to abandon text, because text is what goes into the AAS, the Acte Apostolicae Sedis, right? This is when it, as close as we can tell, this is when it becomes part of the magisterium, formally speaking, is when something's placed into the AAS, like Pope Francis in September of 2016 put, this is the only correct interpretation, the Argentine bishops of Amoris Laetitia, you guys have it, we're giving communion to the civilly divorced and remarried. He placed it into the AAS, that letter that he kind of rubber stamped. The only way to call it is to say, words of Skilabix, words of Cardinal Casper, Amazon Synod, 2 synods on the family. We're not sure yet what the purpose of the synods on youth were in between. What they're doing is precisely what Cardinal Casper told Raymond Arroyo on World Over, is using text to show orthodoxy. Right? When you show a screen in basketball, a pick, means you look like you're coming, and then to fade or faint. So show a screen, sometimes you show. And this is what they do. Monsignor Charles Pope named this weaponized ambiguity. I want to be more, I love the term. I love Monsignor Pope. And it's a great term, and I have thought in terms of counter-ops, I've thought in the terms of weaponized ambiguity every day for the last half of this pontificate, at least, mainly this entire pontificate. And then he gave this near perfect term for it. So God bless you, Monsignor Pope. But if you take the time to learn the difference between heterodoxy, right, where the text is actually wrong, it's actually clearly signaling bad doctrine, and heteropraxy, then I would submit to you all, and I'm going to do so in written form in a very, very short pamphlet type book, that what we have described by Cardinal Casper, by Skilabix, is not even weaponized ambiguity in the sense of heterodoxy. we need to call it what it is. It's codified heteropraxy. And what that means is you say something that's neither really orthodox nor heterodox, but we err in magisterial jurisprudence on the side of orthodox. So if it's not heterodox, it's orthodox. That's how it works. That's how the hermeneutic of continuity works, and we're going to talk about that because it's the necessary next step. But so it's, I guess, orthodox when something incredibly conspicuous yet not formally wrong is written. That's usually about discipline or where discipline meets doctrine. We can't call that, even though it's weaponized ambiguity, we can't call it heterodoxy. So call it codified heteropraxy. Heteropraxy means bad liturgical practice, bad disciplinary practice in terms of the church. And this is what's happening at such an alarming rate. And this is how the radicals have infiltrated the church and turned everything around for the worse. So, codified heteropraxy means they can play within the rules of orthodoxy, technically speaking, and still get what they want and squint at and eventually, over the generations, produce a kind of heterodoxy through codified heteropraxy. Okay, that's how it works. That's how the famous footnote in Chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia worked. It's nothing in the AAS that would have to be reversed, right? Because technically it's as close, I think, to heterodoxy as we've ever come. That famous footnote from Amoris Laetitia that ended up being subsequently back interpreted, back calculated to lead to Pope Francis's allowance in the AAS for communion to the civilly divorced and remarried. It sounds more technical than it is, but technically that would not have to be reversed later. Just the practice would. So it's codified heteropraxy. Same thing. But the point is that it's conspicuous at the time, and this is the difference between a kind of naive textualist and an intuitive textualist, which is what I want to talk about in my book. An intuitive textualist that says, no, this isn't technically heterodoxy, but I don't want to start giving him credit the way George Weigel called Amoris Laetitia a win for conservatives, or something like that. He called Carita Amazonia a win for conservatives, or something like that. Neither was. Both contained conspicuous lines, the former by reference to a footnote, the latter by reference to a footnote that wasn't a footnote, an attachment, which were very conspicuous, where any decently trained jurisprude, and I want to talk about this in 1 minute, the difference between a theologian and someone trained in jurisprudence, which is what I am. I'm trained in Thomistic philosophy and jurisprudence, reading legal constitutional documents. I'm going to show you why that gives me an advantage when I set out to do constructions, interpretations of these hermeneutics. A trained one, an intuitive one, can be neither a post-textualist nor a naive textualist. See, theologians, when they read a codified heteropraxy like Carita Amazonia or Amoris Laetitia or some of the passages from Vatican II, they are committed, theologians, to playing ball one step behind, to playing chess one step behind, to making moves one step behind, because they say, well, because of the hermeneutic of continuity, one of whose 2 iterations I advocate, by the way, because of this, we pretty much have to play from behind. Not true. Not true. I'll show you why. If you do it the theologian's way, and this is why 20th century theologians have been so utterly worthless to us, worthless in the fight against the heteropraxists, against the ones who are the modernists in the church, let's call them that, the Freemasons in the church. The people will ask me. I mean, I'm not self-flattering. I'll just say though, how was I out ahead of the curve on Carita Amazonia now that Steve Skojic and I have been vindicated. How'd you know? How'd you see this coming? Because all you use is a little intuition and textualism. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. And I don't read these texts with a commitment to playing behind the eight ball. I read these texts, lower magisterial texts, with a commitment to looking for conspicuous textual passages that will be A, non-heterodoxical, but B, squinting at heteropraxy and allowing Cardinal Casper, Cardinal Skilabix to do their dark magic later, right? It's not hard. It's not. That's what people need to understand, is to be ahead of the eight ball. You do not need to be a trained theologian. That actually kind of puts you a step behind, a formal commitment to being a step behind. And you don't have to be a jurisprudence professor in law school. All I'm saying is I studied with great care, with great caution in law school, because I had no interest in practicing, which is part of the reason I don't practice. Did law for 1 year, didn't like it. I never expected to do it. I only wanted to study constitutional law, and I studied the constitutional law at one of the top 5 places to study con law in the country. And I studied with many, many originalist scholars. The late, great Nino Scalia had a special relationship with my school, my alma mater, the Originalist Center there. So jurisprudence and constitutional law, I took like 9 classes. I was skipping bar courses to take these classes. I'm a PhD student at heart, not a JD student at heart. They issued me the JD, but I was taking the classes like I was going to write a dissertation at the end, which you don't do in law school. My point in all this is saying, in jurisprudence, there is not one but 2 types of textualism, which both types are very out of fashion, grew very out of fashion. At the beginning of the 20th century, there's a movement called legal realism, where it basically placed in the hands, in the head, more like it, of the jurist, in the case of the Supreme Court, the highest jurist in the land, the kind of smell test to just say, oh, even though we're only supposed to be interpreting whether or not this law gets dinged or violates any constitutional provisions, we're not going to do that. We're going to it's legal realism. We're just going to apply a smell test, and we're going to knock down any laws made by any of the state legislatures or Congress, the national legislature, to basically legislate from the bench, which is not what they're supposed to be doing. They're just supposed to be looking for, does this run afoul of any constitutional provisions? If not, the legislature is the branch of the government that's supposed to be making the law. We just interpret. Legal realism said, no, we're not going to do that. And it really ruined the country. All of the bad stuff, 85% of it was enabled by the court. And it was enabled by, actually, many of them were Masons on the bench. It's a different show, though. So with the late, great Antonin Scalia, we call him Nino Scalia, he made textualism, just reading the text of a law and reading the text of the Constitution and doing the job of a justice. He made this like trendy again, almost like it's a gimmick to just read text for what it says, right? As Scalia was famed for saying when he'd give talks, I had the the honor of meeting him twice. He'd just say, look, originalism, one of the 2 forms of textualism, the good form, is the only game in town. It's the only game in town. I'm not doing anything special. If you read Huck Finn with a group, of friends from church or whatever, and one of the guys is saying, hey, this isn't a story about a teenage boy and an escaped black American slave sailing up the Mississippi. If they're saying anything but that, if they're describing the plot to Catcher in the Rye, then you'd just be like, get out of the group. You're crazy, or go get your head checked, right? That's what the judicial realists were doing. They're just saying, we're going to make this book about something totally else. Scalia brought, in the 80s, back into fashion, just reading a text and saying, this was the original public meaning of the words on the page. Now, original public meaning, listen very carefully here, is a commitment to original textualism, originalist textualism, meaning at the time published. the document was published. So if it's 1857, what did the word gay mean in 1857? It meant happy, right? By 1957, it was changing into something else, maybe 67. So you look up in a dictionary of the time what it meant, right? And when we're talking about laws and constitutions, we have very specific dates. This law or this segment of the Constitution was ratified on a particular day of a particular year. So all Scalia said was, look, even if the word changed, the word in question or the clause in question, its meaning is changed around the way language does. We go to the original public meaning, no private meaning, because that's where you get into when you reify, when you value, assign value to a private meaning or a non-public meaning or a contemporary meaning instead of the original meaning, then you allow codified heteropraxy. The Supreme Court uses it too. It's not just the bad guys in the church. If you stick to the original public meaning, then you don't care about private meaning or intent. You say, I dispense any kind of dealing in intentionalism. And you just say, original public meaning, this is all we care about. This will all make sense in 4 minutes. The second wrong-headed type of textualism is most notably put forward by a philosopher of language named Stanley Fish. Stanley Fish was an intentionalist textualist who said, well, irrespective of what the original public meaning of this ratified Constitution was, right? Someone wrote the Constitution and, you needed a supermajority to ratify it. The intention of the author is what really matters, not the original public meaning. That's no good, though, because in the case of constitutions, whether we're talking legal constitutions like state constitutions or the Constitution of 1788 with the Bill of Rights added in 1791, or the sacred constitutions of Vatican II, there are several. We debate them, we bandy about them. I did on TNT. Me and Dave do it on Rules for Retrogrades. I do it on Twitter. We can apply the same scrutiny to a textualist read, an originalist textualist read of these constitutions versus an intentionalist textualist read of these two constitutions. So you understand the difference. Originalist textualism is the good one, if you trust me, if you trust Nino Scalia, God rest his soul. He's a good Catholic, practicing Catholic. And what that means is a commitment to the original public meaning of text. And judges who are interpreters of that text are just going to use those strict rules laid down by what did this word or clause or phrase mean publicly, originally, in thus and such time. The bad form of textualism is intentionalist textualism. And that doesn't look at what did this mean at the time when it was relevant, when a document was passed. Say, I forget whether or not the document on the liturgy of Vatican II, the sacred document, Sacrosanctum Concilium, I think it was passed in 62 or 63, the first one that they ratified. Whenever it was written and then voted on, same as legal constitution, what did X word mean? The original public meaning? Yes, that's what we want to go with. The private intent, which is especially relevant when we're talking about the Vatican II fathers, who did have a private meaning that verged from, was in intention with, the original public meaning. Whose textualism do we honor? And see, the people that I argue with the most about this are fellow traditionalists. So there is a great article on Unum Sanctum Catholicum. I've talked about this with Dr. Taylor Marshall before, called "What is the Hermeneutic of Continuity?" I'm going to read you the opening to this, and I'm going to explain how most traditionalists have an understandable, I think I'm very sympathetic to it, knee-jerk reaction to the hermeneutic of continuity, because there are two hermeneutics of continuity in addition to a hermeneutic of rupture. Very, very important stuff. So bear with me. One is intentionalist, one is textualist. Obviously, the other one is legal realism altogether. Let me just read you the beginning of this. Ever since the pontificate of Benedict XVI, the term hermeneutic of continuity, which he really coined, has been proposed as descriptive of an interpretation of the Second Vatican Council that stresses the continuity between pre- and post-conciliar teachings. This hermeneutic of continuity is generally opposed to a hermeneutic of rupture, which sees Vatican II in terms of a break or rupture with tradition. You guys know much of this. Progressives are generally rupturist, while conservative Orthodox Catholics favor the hermeneutic of continuity proposed by Benedict XVI and enthusiastically embraced by those advocating a reform of the reform. Now, with hardcore traditionalists, who, we've spoken at great length, have my sympathies. They also are hermeneutic of rupturists for the opposite reason. Right? The bad guys say, the German bishops clearly own, look, it's rupture. Vatican II is a new, the second coming of the Holy Spirit. I think JP2 used that term, a second Pentecost. And they just want to own it. So it's like a new church. It's a different church. There's no continuity. We're cool with it. This is all good. Hardcore traditionalists want to just say, let's call this for what it is. There is such heteropraxy that abounds everywhere in the church, we might as well just say, yes, it's a totally different church. Okay, those are the two hermeneutic of rupturists. Then there are, according to this article, two hermeneutics of continuity, and they correspond perfectly with the arguments from jurisprudence that I'm making. Let me continue on a little bit. What exactly is the hermeneutic of continuity? It is as self-evident as the simple definition I gave above would lead us to believe. Is it? In fact, it is not. And while I support the concept of the hermeneutic of continuity, I must firmly insist that we begin by understanding what the hermeneutic of continuity is exactly. To say that it stresses continuity between pre- and post-conciliar teaching is not sufficient, because there are two ways one can interpret what this means, and as we shall see, much is writing on which approach one prefers. I'm just going to read the two ways, and then I'm going to be done. I'm going to explain how jurisprudes, who understand the two types of textualism and which one to favor, Scalia's, get this right, and everyone else, including very smart theologians and very smart non-theologians within the church, get it wrong. The two ways of interpreting hermeneutic of continuity are the following. 1. The teaching of the Second Vatican Council is already in perfect continuity with tradition, and in proposing a hermeneutic of continuity, we are being asked to realize and appropriate this truth. The hermeneutic of continuity is simply recognizing what the Council really taught, as opposed to what liberals drew out of it. In this interpretation, discontinuity is a myth that must be dispelled by proper catechesis. Now, this hermeneutic is the one that is rightly rejected by righteously bitter traditionalists, and it's the one that is non-righteously embraced by neoconservatives, semi-conservatives within the church in the JP2 and Benedict pontificates. The kind of right of centrists that say, hey, hermeneutic of continuity acknowledges rightly truths that are not in tension with preconciliar life in the church. This doesn't pass the smell test. It doesn't pass the smell test. And we know that. So most people, Marshall and I did a good show on this, when they hear, hey, the hermeneutic of continuity is actually a great thing that Benedict and Ratzinger, before he was Benedict, gave us for interpreting the council, where there's clearly a tension between preconciliar life and postconciliar life. So how is a guy like Tim Gordon endorsing the hermeneutic of continuity? I say it all the time. Yeah, they're like two different churches. Here's how. There's a second, and this is the correct hermeneutic of continuity, and I'm going to show you how the jurisprudence bears it out. Number 2, The teaching of the Second Vatican Council presents a departure from Catholic tradition, and in proposing for a hermeneutic of continuity, we are being asked to do an action, to look for a way to reconcile conciliar teaching with preconciliar teaching. That's actually what hermeneutic means. It means we're going to do something to the text here. We'll see what in a second. The hermeneutic of continuity consists in new statements or actions on the part of the magisterium, bishops, and priests to bring Vatican II documents into synthesis with prior magisterial teaching. This usually means just ignoring several of the heteropraxical statements in the post-conciliar church. You just ignore it and you say, we're going to wait and see if the church picks up this kind of newish teaching, which it won't because the church will correct itself. So it's still there in the magisterium. Just what's its meaning? Well, it's basically null and void. That's because I'm applying a hermeneutic of continuity. In this interpretation, discontinuity is a fact, we all know it is, that must be rectified. Whereas in the first hermeneutic of continuity, the one that unfortunately most people believe is what hermeneutic of continuity means, discontinuity is a myth that must be dispelled by proper catechesis. And that's why you get so annoyed at these kind of right centrists that say nothing in the church changed. No, everything changed. Everything turned to codified heteropraxy. Now, here's how my unique jurisprudence analysis makes the whole thing go. If one submits oneself to intentionalist textualism, which unfortunately is a lot of people think textualism is the Stanley Fish intentionalist form, then though on that jurisprudential read of those Vatican II documents, where intent mattered, private meaning can be opposed to the public meaning of the words, then the real meaning, so to speak, the Platonic form of the meaning of several of those sacred constitutions is the weaponized ambiguity being squinted at by guys like Ronner or Skilabix. Let's use Skilabix because he's the one that said, we wrote one thing and we're going to do another. What we wrote isn't clear, left or right. What we're going to do is very clearly left. Intentionalism vindicates that. Yeah, right? Intentionalism, that kind of textualism says the meaning really is, in some Platonic, really real sense, whatever the intent in the minds of the bad guys who ran the council was. You see? Very important. When we shift to the proper textualism, Scalian textualism, where we concern ourselves with the original public meaning of the text, then that enables us to go and say, no, this text is unclear. So we apply a hermeneutic, which is an interpretive aid, if you go look it up. And the interpretive aid says this is kind of nebulous, it's amorphous. So this language where we're going to just assume continuity, since it doesn't really mean anything clear, the original public meaning of the language is it kind of means nothing. It's not heterodox, right? Because we can't make heads or tails of it, but it certainly can't be, and we certainly can't interpret that A prime for 1960 years of the Roman Catholic Church that A means A prime, that a thing means its opposite. So the original public interpretation of those words would just be to say, kind of throw up your hands and say, yeah, here are several, if I highlighted all the nebulous passages in all those sacred documents, I would say on an originalist read, yeah, we kind of just bracket them, right? The way Ephesians 5 is bracketed in here, missal at church. They want to bracket and not emphasize or read even the real meaning of Ephesians 5, right? Wifely submission. We get to do that to anything that's new but new in an unclear way. We just say, hey, the original public meaning of these words, it's not really clear what they're saying to do. So we apply the hermeneutic, and we're going to go with the preconciliar language. That's the Scalian textualist read, where you say, yeah, we have the Vatican II documents. They're valid. They're on point, right? Some of what they say is clear, and most of what they say is clear is good. What they're probably trying to be, if we examine their intent, which I'll talk about in a sec, if they're trying to be nefarious, it's not clear in terms of original public meaning of the language. So we just kind of We kind of just shrug our shoulders at it and keep doing what we were doing before. Textualism, rightly conceived. On the intentionalist, non-rightly conceived, unfortunately popular jurisprudence, the model of what those troubling Vatican II documents mean, we all can see. The language isn't clear, but what is clear, all trads, retrogrades, agree. While the language is not clear, their intent was. Why? Because with Stanley Fish, intentionalist textualism, you can look at things like, okay, well, what did they do afterwards? Don't look for heterodoxy, look for their heteropraxy. We know what their intent was. I'm not disagreeing with anyone here. Their intent was bad. The only people I disagree with are people that say their intent wasn't bad. But those people then say, so if you agree that their intent was bad, why do you call yourself a hermeneutic of continuity proponent, like most of the kind of neocons in the church? This is why. Because Stanley Fish is wrong, not just when reading legal constitutions, when reading sacred constitutions as well. We take them at the original public meaning, we apply that kind of interpretive aid, and we say, oh, cool. You want to say something vague, Pope Francis, in Amoris Laetitia, in Querida Amazonia, in Laudato Si, or Council Fathers in Sacrosanctum Concilium, or take your pick, Gaudium et Spes, whatever. Okay, well, the original public meaning of those words is kind of zero, so we add zero to what the past was doing. However, if you say, hey, well, I know their intent in intentionalist textualism, the meaning actually inheres in what we find out their intent to be, then yeah, you're not going to say there's any continuity there. But I can say there's continuity there as a Scullian textualist, because those words mean nothing. Okay, so let that sink in for a second. It's really, really important that people begin to train themselves to think this way. When they read a text, what was the meaning at the time? Even if they, because that's absolutely what codified heteropraxy, weaponized ambiguity does. They're masters of it, right? Because they're living in a post-textual world. I don't want to go post-textual. That's relativism. I'm saying stick in a textualist world. But the textualist world where we go Scalia is, Scalian jurisprudence is intuitive textualism. If we go Stanley Fish, honor the bad intents of the textualism, that is a commitment to naive textualism. So let's be intuitive. And we're intuitive simply by saying we know what they're probably trying to do, the intent, but we're sticking them to the words, and we simply ignore the words. There is continuity in ignoring, say, a teaching on the environment in Laudato Si, that it's clearly new. We see Francis has the intent that this gets picked up in the AAS, in the magisterium, right away, and gets treated as if it's part of the deposit of faith, what we really have to honor as Catholics. No. It's kind of in a moratorium period. It's like, well, this is new. It's clearly new. And if future popes, many of them, don't pick up on it and write on it, it's just kind of what legal scholars call dicta. It's not the main black letter law. Nothing can be black letter law in the Catholic Church unless it was there in scripture or tradition. They're not allowed to add to it. That's how it works. That's why I say Hermeneutic of Continuity. So, I've given you the upshot here. The way to be intuitive in your approach to all this is simple. You're just always looking for conspicuous language. Stargazers, astronomers, amateur ones know when you're looking in the sky for interesting Messier objects, deep space, globular clusters or nebular clusters. You're kind of just scanning. You scan the stars. The bright stars are all the things you see, obviously, if you're looking into a telescope. But you let your peripheral vision look for the nebular clusters. It just looks like a blur. That's how you spot it. That's how you spot it in your finder scope. Then you go to your high-powered scope. That's what I'm saying. First, when you read a document like Querida Amazonia, just kind of be using your vague vision, your zoomed-out peripheral vision. Look for little blurs. And the language will even be blurry, so the analogy holds quite well, I believe. And when you find that blur kind of zero in on that paragraph, like I did and Steve Skojec did in Querida Amazonia, then apply your high power telescope, and then you can start picking it apart. And then it becomes quite easy as any kind of textualist to say, here's what they're probably doing with it. Here's their intention. And always remembering that we're not bound by their intention. That's it. And that is literally, I want to get serious for a second. That's how they've done everything. That's how the attack on the church from the French Revolution to the Russian Revolution, the external attacks don't work. The internal attacks do. Everything bad that's happened in the church has been done by codified heteropraxy, weaponized ambiguity. Now you know. Now you also know that you should, unless, hey, prove me wrong on this jurisprudential model, you should say you support Pope Benedict's Hermeneutic of Continuity, type 2, not type 1. The type which means we have to apply something which enables us to ignore any discontinuities between preconciliar life and conciliar life. It does not mean Hermeneutic of Continuity 1, which means there's already continuity there. That type doesn't make any sense. That's not a hermeneutic. That would just say there's continuity here, no need for a hermeneutic. People just aren't understanding the words involved. The hermeneutic is like an aid we apply that enables two ostensibly opposed things, contraposed ideas, to be eased and fit eventually. So type 1 doesn't even make sense grammatically, much less syntagmatically, I guess. So it's a more technical episode, but I think it'll be really helpful to you. Let me know if it is or it's not. I'm going to write it up in a little pamphlet, probably a quick write, and Tan's interested in the book. But let me know what you think about this episode. I'm really curious. It's at work in Querida Amazonia. I'm not, a prognosticator. That this is how Steve and I knew exactly where to look in Querida Amazonia. We just looked for those kind of nebula clusters with our peripheral vision, then zoomed in on it. It's really clear what they're going to do with their intent. But we're not bound by their intent because we don't buy Stanley Fish. We buy Nino Scalia, a good Catholic boy. Anyway, everyone, please remember to go out there, purchase, pre-order Rules for Retrogrades. That book is like what I just did. It gives you the little angles regarding how to see and then act. This is just regarding jurisprudence. There are 40 rules that are going to be released in a week and a half, are actions for all scopes of this funny business of life, right? Some of them are jurisprudential, some of them are sexual relations, some of them are in the church, some of them are out of the church. It's that kind of methodology that we're employing in 40, 3 to 5 page rules. And everyone who's read it loves it. You can get it on Tan's website or on Amazon Books. And please, the day it comes out, feel free to go leave a review wherever reviews are relevant. Okay, look for our Patreon pages. Please subscribe to this channel. Lots of ex-TNT viewers are saying they don't know where to look for my new channel with Dave. Please, it's here. Timothy Gordon, Rules for Retrogrades. Share, click the bell. Peace, we're out. We'll be back with a numbered episode in 2.5 days. Thank you.